It's Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook. Chapter 19, Chasing Crustaceans. It was just a quick getaway, my mom said. Just a long weekend in the Bahamas, a beautiful string of Caribbean islands roughly situated between Miami and Cuba. And though she knew I didn't want to go, she said the whole family plus one of my aunts was joining the fun. She ran optimistic at times. In the end, a few participants dropped off. Ding would be busy with a regatta, and Mr. Horrible would be entertaining a babysitter at home. It is unclear why we were going, and I didn't know how we would get there. Commercial airliner, Chalk's Ocean Airways, or a cruise ship out of Port Everglades. Chalk's was my pick. These magnificent flying coaches were much bigger than the common seaplanes with their small floats attached below the fuselage. A Chalk's seemed huge whenever I stood next to one or bobbed along in a pram while one roared by on takeoff. The fuselage itself looked like a large speedboat's V hull. Below the impressive wings hung massive pontoons. When they revved their twin turboprop motors to take the stage, everyone in the inner bay turned to watch. We all knew that in a few moments the brilliant white amphibian would thunder by at 70 miles an hour and then lift off as it rumbled into the bright Florida sky en route to tropical islands over the horizon. Boaters on Biscayne Bay had to watch for other sea craft and the occasional plane from Chalk's. There was nothing more than the main channel that ended at their hangar and launch to suggest a runway out through the mouth of the bay. Boaters of all stripes and colors were simply forewarned to be aware and yield to Chalk's. We did. Rarely a Saturday or Sunday went by without at least a couple of takeoffs and landings by the big white aircraft as they delivered and picked up passengers and valuable cargo from islands all over the Caribbean. With all the boating action on the bay, one might be surprised that Chalk's seaplanes weren't running over hapless boaters left and right, but they weren't. They had a large enough presence, a rich enough reputation, and finally made a heck of a racket when they revved up those powerful turbo engines. If one was at least a semi-conscious boater and Chalk's headed your way, you knew it. And I suspect that the pilots were well versed themselves. No need for any signage. In the end, we didn't fly Chalk's that day, but cruised over on a liner, my mother's favorite way to go. She despised air transportation. Though she married a heavily decorated World War II Air Force pilot and had been airborne afterward for a few exhilarating spins, she was not enamored of transportation conveyances that left the ground. We arrived at a very windy Nassau and set up camp in what looked like a townhouse of sorts. It was nondescript and clearly not part of a hotel or resort. The beach was steep and slid right down into a bay. Australian pines provided plenty of shade. Almost at once, there appeared to be some discussion among the adults over the lack of a sunny beach. They had been assured the property had one. Further, it was rocky. My mom and Aunt Fanny were hoping for a sunny and sandy spot to position their beach chairs and umbrella, to best enjoy a good book, cigarette, and a cocktail or two. Mom, Dad, and Fanny grumbled. I guessed that this wasn't going to last. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the three sulking adults now inside, Lobster and I had noticed that the rocky shore was home to an enormous number of tiny hermit crabs. It was impossibly infested. Hundreds and hundreds were on the move. We quickly commandeered a large red plastic bucket from the side of the property, and were soon scurrying about, filling it to the brim. In short order, it was overflowing. They were quite docile. If one picked a hermit up by his shell, he instantly popped completely inside. Put him back down, and in a few moments, tips of the sharp claws would slowly curve outward. In a few seconds, his shell would rise up, and the crab would be on the move again. A hermit crab, left to his own devices, will not luxuriate for long in his shiny, pointy house before he heads out again. Our red bucket brimming with crabs, we headed inside as dusk approached. From the hushed adult conversation in the kitchen over cocktails, I could surmise that things had not improved. Our hermit hotel was not getting it done, uniformly failing well short of adult expectations. It was understood that we would be migrating elsewhere, but not until morning. After a forgettable dinner of bland local fish, we were back at the condo. A vigorous verbal tussle began as soon as we arrived, when the subject of our hermit crab collection was raised. Lobster and I had spent the entire afternoon collecting them, and he'd be darned if he was just going to turn them loose at that late hour. The adults in charge pushed back, using the rational position that they were sea creatures who yearned for their home among the briny waves and sandy bottom. It just wasn't right to keep them cooped up all night in a condominium. Alas, Lobster wasn't buying any of it, as he fortified his intractable position. When dug in, it was very hard indeed to break him free and turn him back. Logic and rational thought had little sway. The large red bucket, covered with a bathroom towel, would remain, but just for the night. Water was added. Triumphant, Lobster stared ahead, sitting up in the king-size bed we were to share. A relaxed smile of victory framed his face. A few nightcaps for the adults were served, and a mumbled discussion rambled on for a few minutes about the next day's plans for better accommodations and a more sunny, sandy, and less crabby beach. Deep in the night, I heard the first stirrings, just a few light rustling sounds really. Then a thrashing of covers was followed by my mom's blood-curdling screams. Dad fumbled and flailed into action, searching frantically for the nightstand lamp. He knocked it to the ground with a smash. More screams erupted. The flash of the breaking lamp at least briefly illuminated his way to the bathroom, and he rushed there headlong with a stumble and a crunching under his bare feet. He found the light, and when he finally flicked it on, perhaps pitch dark would have been preferred. There, before the Brown family, were several hundred pinching hermit crabs, not in their big red bucket covered by a bath towel anymore. Instead, they were actively on the move, hustling along and pinching everything in sight. Hundreds of hermit crabs covered our room from floor to walls to ceiling. They were crawling over bedspreads and blankets, our clothes, our suitcases, and our shoes. An even more aggressive regiment had scaled the drapes all the way to the ceiling and, not quite familiar with the landscape and foothold, were repeatedly dropping onto the bed near and onto Mom's head. They were even foraging through her hair. She was deliriously hysterical. The little critters had even crawled under the sheets, in hopes perhaps of bedding down for the night like humans do. Under the bed itself was a special dark realm for the pinchy critters. Rounding them up was utter chaos, and took over an hour. Every time we thought we were finished, we'd spot a couple more. It was like eating Raisin Bran cereal. No matter how thorough and painstaking the dipping of the spoon, there always seems to be just one more raisin in the bottom of the bowl. Very early in the new day, just as dawn was breaking, all the hermits were finally accounted for and redeposited in the red bucket, this time with the bath towel plus a large book on top. Lobster was taking no chances. He sulked beside me in the bed. Exhausted, Mom, Dad, and Fanny had drifted back to sleep, and all was still. Just then, I heard a light scratching sound coming from the dark bathroom. I turned my head quietly to look at Lobster, with my eyebrows raised high. He looked right back and smiled, his glasses held together, as always, with a crusty piece of masking tape and crookedly cocked halfway down his nose. It's Saturday night. Junkle's parents are out to dinner. His older sister is being paid to babysit. but she's distracted while flirting on her princess phone with her new boyfriend. Chunkle spots the keys to his father's brand new Mercedes. What would you do? This is chapter 20, and you better buckle your seatbelts. It's called Breaking in the Bends.